You're in the wrong place. This tournament is for athletes, not for people cosplaying as poverty overcoming adversity. That was the first thing Amelia Brooks heard as she stepped onto Vanderbilt Field, a place where every swing was worth $1 million deal, and every pair of shoes on the ground had a limited edition code. She wasn't wearing a sponsored uniform. She didn't have expensive shoes. There were no brand logos on her sleeves, and her name wasn't on the national leaderboard. All she had was a faded wooden club, a pair of worn-out canvas shoes, and a silent gaze that made people look away if they stared too long. And they laughed. They laughed when she showed up. They laughed at how nothing about her stood out except her silence. They laughed, thinking she was just cheap entertainment in a tournament wrapped in gold. But what they didn't know was that in just a few minutes, the very woman they mocked would bring an entire system to its knees. And it all started with one swing. Excuse me, but who allowed a waitress to step onto the main playing field? The voice rang out, not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the luxurious music echoing across Vanderbilt Arena. A soft chuckle followed, then another. It spread like a venomous undertow, slithering through rows of gold-trimmed seats, where even the bottled water came wrapped in polished metal engraved with individual names. On the most prestigious baseball field in America, where every swing was tied to a global brand and every pair of shoes cost thousands, she stepped forward. No stage, no spotlight, no welcome, just a white t-shirt with a frayed collar, a faded wooden bat, and a pair of sneakers still stained with mud from some forgotten public park. Her name was Amelia Brooks. No one in the stands recognized that name, and no one cared. In this place, where power was measured in follower counts, in logos stitched onto gloves, and in invitations printed in gold, she had nothing that proved she belonged, and that's exactly why they allowed themselves to look down on her as if her very presence was a glitch in the flawless elite system. But what they didn't know was that she hadn't come to fit into their world. She came to change it. The Vanderbilt Invitational wasn't a sports tournament. It was a luxury showcase disguised as a baseball competition. Here, a person's worth wasn't measured by skill or passion, but by the logo on their shoes, their social media rankings, and which row they sat in. Within the VIP section, athletes entered the field like they were walking into Milan Fashion Week. Bats were custom-designed athletic uniforms tailored in France, and even the drinking water came in limited edition bottles made exclusively for the event. Light from hundreds of drones hovered above and shimmered onto the field, turning the baseball diamond into a runway paved in diamonds. In this dazzling space, everything existed to flaunt. Every handshake, every glittering watch, every selfie is tagged with a luxury brand. And then amidst all that opulence, there was a presence that made the entire atmosphere awkward. Amelia Brooks. A girl with no watch on her wrist, no Italian-stitched gloves, no sponsor's name printed on her shirt. She wore a faded white t-shirt, worn canvas shoes, and carried an old wooden bat without a logo. No one knew who she was, and no one cared, simply because she gave off no signals that would make anyone believe she belonged there. Glances darted, side eyes flicked, smirks appeared and vanished like polished blades. A female athlete nudged her teammate, tilted her head toward Amelia, and whispered, "She's probably here to help clean up or apply for a job in the back room." The other burst out laughing. "No way, look again. She's actually getting ready to play. Maybe she thinks this is some kind of chance for all show or something." The VIP rows began to stir. Surprise quickly morphed into discomfort, then into disdain. And to those who had grown used to living in a velvet-wrapped world, anything that didn't shine was easily mistaken for trash. Amelia remained still. She didn't walk away. She didn't try to explain herself. She stayed silent, as if none of their judgments held any weight against the truth she carried inside. A truth that was simple, raw, and didn't need applause. I didn't come here to be accepted. I came here to play, and that more than anything was what scared them most. No one had to give the order. The field divided itself in two. On one side stood the radiant glow of famous names, people who always appeared with flawless makeup and perfectly PR-polished smiles. On the other side stood one uninvited figure who somehow drew everyone's attention, Amelia Brooks. Her silence made them uncomfortable. Her presence offended their sense of aesthetics, and so the most natural reaction from this world began. They went on the offensive. Sloan Hastings, the heiress of the Hastings global media empire, emerged from the VIP section like a queen entering her coronation. Her jersey was a one-of-a-kind design from Balmain Sport, hand-stitched with silver thread. Her hair had been styled by a professional who worked with Met Gala celebrities. She glanced at Amelia from head to toe and let out a soft laugh. That bat looks like it was just fished out of a moldy basement. Someone chimed in. No, look closer. It's got tape wrapped around the handle. Is she seriously bringing a parody prop to an actual tournament? Laughter rippled through the guest stands. It didn't need to be spelled out. Everyone understood. This wasn't a competitor, but a source of amusement for a luxurious afternoon. Vivian Monroe, the tournament's event director, approached Amelia with a dangerously polite expression. "Ma'am, this area is restricted to athletes with valid identification codes. Your presence is compromising the image of the event." She paused for a moment, then added, this time loud enough for the nearby reporters to hear, "If you don't leave the field, we will be forced to request security assistance. There's no room here for cheap publicity stunts." Amelia didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't offer an explanation. And that, more than anything, made them angrier. A national team athlete shook his head. "She really thinks this is how you get attention now. People will do anything for TikTok fame these days." Another muttered, "Let her swing. If the ball flies out of her league, at least we'll get some free comedy." Each word was a thorn flung into the air, and every thorn aimed to pierce the spine of the one person standing still like a statue at the center of a world that refused to accept her. But Amelia didn't need to say a single word, because in just a few minutes they would all understand that what they had just mocked was actually the very heart of this entire tournament. Amelia's silence was starting to wear on them. In a world where everyone fought for the microphone to speak, to boast, to prove their worth, someone who simply stood still and reacted to nothing became a thorn in the crowd's eye. And then, like a predator, catching the scent of blood, Sloan Hastings stepped forward. Her jersey gleamed under the lights, her golden hair curled to perfection, and her brand-new luxury sports shoes still had the protective film on the heel. She didn't walk, she performed. And when she reached Amelia, she stopped, bent slightly, as if about to award a Medal of Honor to a soldier. But then her voice rang out, each word sharp and precise, like a blade slicing skin. "You know the rules, don't you? 3 missed swings, and you kneel in the middle of the field in front of every camera and say just 3 words. I am unworthy. Do you dare?" The stands erupted. Applause, mocking whistles, bursts of laughter, every sound confirming that this game was over before it even began. But Amelia didn't look at the crowd. She looked straight into Sloane's eyes and answered light as air, but sharp as a freshly honed blade. "And what if I hit a home run on my first swing?" Sloan raised an eyebrow as if she had just heard the most ridiculous thing imaginable. If you do that, she said, I'll take off my jersey right here and walk away from this tournament forever. The audience exploded. Cameras spun wildly. Reporters turned their lenses toward Amelia. From afar, members of the organizing team leaned out of their seats, whispering urgently to one another. Someone in the television crew smiled and said, "This is the juiciest drama of the year." But to Amelia, all the noise began to fade. She didn't need cameras. She didn't need witnesses. She only needed one thing: the silence that follows a perfectly struck hit. And so she stepped forward, took her place, and gripped the old wooden bat lightly in her hands while Sloan stood at a distance, stretching like a queen, preparing to execute a traitor. The entire stadium held its breath. Now there were only two people, two swings, one promise, and a truth waiting to be revealed. Amelia stepped onto the batter's mound in a strange kind of silence. Not the silence of respect, but something closer to pity. People in the stands kept recording, not because they believed they were about to witness something great, but because they were certain they'd catch a humiliating fall, a viral moment in the making. Across from her, Sloan Hastings stretched her arm in warm-up motions, her body moving like a machine, programmed to win every movement, echoing the work of high-end gyms and six-figure personal trainers. But Amelia didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on the ball, a small white dot surrounded by a world, gilded in gold. She took a long breath, gripping the old wooden bat that had followed her through hundreds of late-night training sessions on public park grass, where there were no crowds, no microphones, only the wind and sheer determination. The first pitch from Sloan came flying like a dagger crack. The ball veered off, striking the edge of the field with a sharp, cold sound. People laughed. Someone clapped mockingly. The second pitch came in faster. Wham! It slammed into the side netting with such force that it caused nearby drones to tremble. The stands grew louder, the jeers thickened, snide remarks whispered like thin blades slicing through the air. Then came the third pitch, and then boom, a sound unlike the first two. The sound of a perfect collision, followed by a silence so absolute it felt like the world had stopped. The ball left the bat like a white streak of light, cutting through the dense air, soaring past barriers, out of reach of every camera. It flew over the VIP rows, over the media zone, beyond any boundary reached by any athlete in the tournament, and it landed far behind the field like an unspoken declaration. The stadium froze. One beat, two beats. Then the whispers began to rise. The tournament's first home run. From someone whose name they didn't know. From a girl they had laughed at. From a bat with no logo. An elderly voice rose from the umpire's box. That's the first clean home run in Vanderbilt history since 2009. A professional athlete stood up. An influencer lowered their phone. Sloan stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. And Amelia, she simply took a step back, lowered her bat, and said nothing. Because when the truth rings loud and clear in the air, there's no need to speak at all. The VIP section was stunned into silence. Sloan's knees wavered, photographers dropped their cameras and stood, and then the VIP box shook. A man stepped forward. The moment the home run landed, the VIP section shook, as if something deep within had just awakened. Bewildered eyes turned toward the glass-enclosed central box of the stadium, a place where no one had moved all afternoon until now. And then the glass doors opened. A man stepped out. No bodyguards, no microphone, just presence. His dark gray suit fit him perfectly. His stride was unhurried, but each step seemed to crush the silence beneath it. No one introduced him. No one needed to Christopher Vaughn, CEO of the largest sports conglomerate in America, the primary investor of the Vanderbilt Invitational, the man who held life and death power over every sponsorship deal tied to this tournament. No one expected him to be here. No one knew he had been watching all along, and absolutely no one imagined that the woman they had just mocked was his wife. Christopher walked to the center of the field, where Amelia still stood alone, a wooden bat in hand, her gaze steady and unwavering. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the organizers. He didn't acknowledge the people who had once laughed in her face. He looked only at her. Then he gently placed a hand on her shoulder, lowered his head, and kissed her forehead before thousands of cameras. No one dared to move. Not a single breath was drawn loudly. Only the soft clicks of camera shutters echoed like a ticking clock, counting down to a coming storm. Christopher took the microphone from a stunned umpire. His voice was deep and cold like steel, tempered by fire. My wife came here because she loves baseball, not for the media, not for fame. And you dared to mock her because of her worn shoes, because she wasn't wearing a logo at our. From this moment on, he turned his head, eyes locked on Sloan and the executives standing behind the barricades. Everyone involved in the discrimination, mockery, or complicity in humiliating my wife will no longer have a name in any tournament I sponsor. All contracts will be terminated, all privileges revoked, and reputation will be the next thing erased. Sloan was frozen lips, trembling, her gleaming jersey no longer enough to hide her panic. An event director beside her went pale. The athletes who once giggled now bowed their heads, as if already calculating escape routes from the stain they had helped create. But there was no escape. The door had closed, the cameras had recorded, and that swing had become a verdict, delivered straight into the face of arrogance. Amelia still stood there, saying nothing, because now she wasn't just the one who scored. She was the reason the entire system had to bow. When Christopher Vaughn finished his sentence, no one dared to applaud. No one pretended they didn't hear clearly, because what was happening now was no longer just a typical stage declaration seen at sports events. This was a public reckoning broadcast live to millions of viewers, and for the first time in Vanderbilt Invitational history, the cameras were no longer focused on the celebrities. They were focused on those bowing their heads. Sloan Hastings was the first name struck from the Federation's athlete roster. Her sponsorship deal with a luxury fashion brand was terminated overnight. All credentials for upcoming international events were revoked, and worst of all, every mocking clip she had posted about Amelia was now recut, branded with the tag "disqualified with pride," and broadcast on Vaughn Media's own network as a prime example of arrogant ignorance. Vivian Monroe, the event's official organizer, was fired on the spot. Her public email account became the target of a firestorm of backlash. Sponsors issued letters demanding a formal apology from the organizing company or face permanent blacklisting. The athletes who had smirked, whispered, and mocked the old bat and worn shoe were each suspended from competition for 6 months. They stood on the field, pale-faced, unable to raise their heads, wearing their privileged wristbands, which had now become symbols of disgrace. An influencer who had secretly filmed Amelia in a mocking video lost her credentials to work at any Vaughn-sponsored sports event. Her content was wiped from platforms within 2 hours. Her media contracts dissolved like they never existed. The press team seated in the auxiliary booth stood up, removed their badges, and quietly walked out of the stadium. An entire system that once believed it was untouchable was now collapsing brick by brick. And it all began with a single swing, with a nameless wooden bat, with a woman they once thought was invisible. But no one stays invisible forever, especially when truth stands with her. And this time, truth had a microphone, a camera crew, and a husband who wasn't just a boastful billionaire, but the man who held ultimate power and wasn't afraid to burn an empire to the ground if that empire dared to harm the woman he loved. As the stadium sank into a tide of reckoning and collapse, as those who once held microphones now dared not speak, Amelia still stood silent, just as she had from the beginning. But now, every eye turned to her, not with contempt, but with something rarer than respect, bitter admiration. No one forced her to speak. No one demanded she take the stage. But when Christopher extended his hand and gently said, "You belong here more than any of them," she nodded and stepped forward, not in lavish gowns, not with makeup or media crews by her side, just a girl in a worn white t-shirt, frayed canvas shoes, and the old wooden bat once dismissed as a prop. She accepted the sports fairness icon honor from the newly appointed organizers, but when invited to give a speech, she said only one sentence. No scolding, no preaching, no poetic philosophy. Just a truth so simple, it left thousands speechless. "I didn't come here to prove I'm better than anyone. I came to play. And if one swing is all it takes to sweep the toxic out of this place, then I'm proud to be the one holding the bat." The applause began slowly. Then it spread. Then it roared like a hammering downpour, crashing through the illusion of an invincible system. Those who once mocked her quietly removed their wristbands. A few bowed their heads in true remorse, and those who had never laughed at her were now the first to stand. The cameras didn't focus on the professional athletes, they focused on Amelia Brooks, the woman once called a misfit, now redefining what it means to be a true athlete. She turned to Christopher. They didn't need to say a word, because some kinds of love don't need declarations, just action. He took her hand, and they walked off the field, while those who once walked red carpets could now only walk in their shadow. And as they stepped through the gates of Vanderbilt Arena, no one was looking at the logos on their shirts anymore. Every gaze followed the wooden bat Amelia still carried. The bat they once laughed at, the bat with no brand. But today, that bat has become a symbol of fairness, resilience, and dignity no money could buy. They didn't need a farewell, because after that day, the world of sports was never the same. And from that moment on, every stadium would have to ask itself, before any game began, are we good enough to deserve someone like her? Not everyone wearing designer clothes is worthy, and not everyone who stays silent is weak. The story of Amelia Brooks reminds us, true value doesn't need to shine, only needs the courage to stand tall and act at the right moment. In a world obsessed with appearances, be the swing that shatters every prejudice. If you've ever been underestimated, don't answer with words, answer with action. Leave a comment if you've gone through something similar. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story for more powerful stories that truly touch the heart.